Hello, and thank you very much, Justice Brunner, for joining us today. We are very grateful for you to join myself and Lauren as we are interviewing each of the 6 candidates for the Ohio Supreme Court, and especially with you participating and running for Chief Justice. So we're very pleased to have you participating. I just want to remind our members and our audiences who will view this recording that the Ohio Academy for Family Physicians, our mission, which our board just recently approved, is to improve the health of patients by advocating for and advancing the specialty of family medicine and providing valuable solutions to the diverse needs of our members. One of those strategic goals within that new strategic plan is to ensure that all of our members receive valuable membership through meaningful engagement experiences and OAFP's unwavering commitment to cultivate professional satisfaction. And so getting in front of our members and bringing the candidates to you is a part of that goal and part of that strategy. Justice Brunner, we really just want to allow you some time to share your background and give some introduction to our members who may know you and those that may not know you. So please feel free to take some time to do that.
All right. Thank you so much for having me today and for doing this service for your members. So I'm Jennifer Brunner. I'm currently a justice on the Ohio Supreme Court. I have been sitting on that court since January 2nd of 2021. And before that, my prior experience includes more than 6 years on the 10th District Court of Appeals in Franklin County. That is one of 12 district courts of appeal. And that district is in particular kind of special because of direct appeals that go from the Court of Claims, which are cases brought against the state of Ohio or political subdivisions, only go to the 10th District and then on to the Supreme Court if the Supreme Court takes those cases. I also served just under 5 years as a common pleas court judge in Franklin County and started the adult felony drug court, which is still in operation today. That makes it in operation for in excess of 18 years. And I'm pleased to see that that's still happening and helping people reclaim their lives. I also served as Ohio's first female Secretary of State from 2007 to 2011. During that time, being given the John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award, which kind of surprised me at the time. But it is a bipartisan award that is given to public officials, elected public officials who try to do what's right, even when it's not popular. One of the most recent recipients of the award is Liz Cheney. But other people who've received it include Kofi Annan, the first responders in 9/11. Gerald Ford was the first recipient for him pardoning President Nixon. So mine was having to do with the election reforms that we undertook in 2007 and 2008 for the first Obama presidential election. I have 17 years of private practice experience, and I also have foreign rule of law experience in Serbia. That's anti-corruption and judicial reform work, election observation in Egypt 3 different times after the ouster of Morsi, teaching at the Bar Association in Sri Lanka, teaching remotely through the American Bar Association in Kazakhstan with civil society groups, and then most recently in the country of Benin in Africa, that's between Togo and Nigeria, working with their Human Rights Commission. It's given me a wonderful perspective to understand rule of law from sort of the bird's eye view, to understand why it is we do what we do. Because when I go to countries where democracy isn't happening very well, I start to see reasons why, and it makes me very careful in my decision-making process to make sure that we're not moving in that direction by some of the decisions we make, at least some of the decisions that I make. On the personal side, I am married to Rick Brunner, who's an attorney since 1978. So that's 44 years. We have 3 children. When my kids were growing up and when I had foster kids for a couple of years, we utilized family practitioners. Believe me, it was a lot easier. But it was great because they understood the dynamics of our family. And, so I could take 3 or 4 kids all in at once. And, we'd all be in there in the examining room. And if we all needed shots, I would be the example, for the rest of them to be brave, to get the first one. So, I believe in that system of practice, and it's benefited my family over the years. Graduated from Miami University undergrad in gerontology. and then Capital Law School at night with honors in both situations. And I grew up in Columbus, and we have a farm in Columbiana County, just south of Youngstown, that we go to every weekend. And during campaign time, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. So thanks. I'm glad to be with you today.
Wow, that's very impressive, and thank you so much for sharing all those experiences, Justice Brunner. With all of that being said, how do you think that shapes your judicial philosophy?
Well, I've actually been in the trenches. I've had to perform felony sentencing. I've had to look a defendant in the eye when I may be sending him or her to prison for the rest of their life. Not an easy thing to do. I've had to swear in witnesses who they brought back from the jail, who are still handcuffed and, raising their right hand like this. And then, going to the Court of Appeals, being able to see it with a little more circumspect, because Court of Appeals are an error correction report court, and then going to the Ohio Supreme Court, we're not doing error correction. We are actually looking at issues that are of great general or public interest, and it's I think my philosophy is really one of public service. I hope as Chief Justice to inspire the judges of this state to see themselves first as public servants who happen to be judges and not the other way around. You're trained, at least I was trained as a trial judge, that you are responsible for your courtroom. And, my experience having, trying to get the drug court started in Common Pleas Court in Franklin County when it was not a really popular idea, judges can tend to see themselves as kings and queens of their courtroom. And from a sense of responsibility, yes, but not from the sense of who you are. So, I think a lot of people want to know, based on what they hear coming at from what Scalia used to say in the U.S. Supreme Court, are you a textualist? Are you originalist? Are you an activist judge? And quite honestly, if you go back to when all of this verbiage came about, it comes from the Federalist Society, which was formed by conservative Yale law students who held a conference around 1981 and, felt that there wasn't enough representation of their conservative, whatever that means, views in the judicial system. And so there's been a lot of money put behind this. I don't know if you've read recently about Barry Seid, who gave his $1.6 billion company to the Federalist Society just before it was sold, so that at the time that the company was sold, it was a tax deduction to Seid to give it to a nonprofit, and then the nonprofit didn't have to pay any capital gains taxes on whatever the difference was between what Seid paid for it and what the buyer paid for it. So then the Federalist Society got $1.6 million and was then able to actually just bank that and live off of, maybe $80 million a year, to be involved in sort of reforming the judiciary. So when we talk about philosophy, mine is one of being fair, being a good public servant, and trying to do my job in the best way possible to meet my oath of office.
Thank you, Justice. When you went over your background, you mentioned receiving the bipartisan Profile and Courage Award. Right now, the country is experiencing polarizing political factions and an increase in partisanship. Can you tell us how you think the court can be a model for promoting civil discourse?
Absolutely. I mean, right now, I'm one of three, if it matters, if it even matters to people, whether you're Democrat or Republican, I'm one of three Democrats on the court. So that means for me to author any decision, I have to gain the vote of a Republican colleague. And so for all the decisions I've authored, I have gained, there's never been an all Democratic decision because it's impossible. And I look at, when you're a judge, you're supposed to drop that party label and you go to court and you're trying to do good public service, and you're trying to make sure, because you have more discretion than the other three branches of government, that you are working at the highest standards possible with the interests of the people that you serve first and foremost in mind. So that means that you don't draft your decisions in snarky language, that you are respectful at all times of all people, knowing that every person is entitled to dignity, and that means your colleagues as well. And so if you can value collegiality, it's a means to the end of providing good public service. And I've thought about, okay, so if you become chief, what are you going to do with all the folks on the court? And I think probably the first thing I would do would be to actually sit down with each justice one-on-one and say, what do you think we could be doing better? What have you not liked, and what have you liked about what we've done so far? And also, having been Secretary of State and having had to work with 88 county boards of elections, in this case, the chief is the superintendent of all the courts of the state under the rules of superintendents. Chief has to actually be that leader and that guide for all those judges all over the state. And so it also behooves the Chief Justice to listen to the judges from around the state. And so, I prefer to be collaborative in my approach. I always have been. When I've been an administrator, Secretary of State's office was about 200 people. Supreme Court's, when you count the Court of Claims, is about 260 people. So, that's a nice size office to develop the rapport that you need to well serve not just the public, but the courts that we serve too. I hope I covered everything.
You did. Thank you so much, Justice. What would you consider to be your most difficult case, and how did you handle it?
I would go back to a case that I had as a trial court judge. It dealt with a serial rapist. And that case, we had the direct participation of the county prosecutor. This was in Franklin County. There were 37 women who had been raped multiple ways. I remember I outlined the indictment, and it was sickening. A plea deal was worked out, and it was going to be a plea deal of 50 years. And we came to the sentencing hearing, and he was with his attorney, and his attorney said, well, he doesn't want to get out of prison. He's trying to figure out why he did all of this. And he was 42 at the time. And I said, excuse me, did you say that you never wanted to get out of prison? And he nodded. And I said, I can help you with that. And, it wasn't a grand, I've watched some judges do kind of a grandstanding, but I calculated in my head, and I thought, okay, he's 42, he can live to be 92. If I gave him a little bit more time, nobody can live that long in prison. So I gave him another 18 years for a total of 68. And it was very easy to find enough offenses to do that with. And I'll tell you, there were not that many victims in court, because every single victim had to be tested for STDs because of who this guy was and what he did. And sadly, I'll tell you that had those rape kits been processed timely, I looked at this, and about 5 women he would not have had the opportunity to rape those 5 women, because he would have still been in prison, and they would have been able to identify his DNA and keep him there for any subsequent trials. So anyways, in Franklin County, it's a big enough county where you have a victim witness assistance person. So they had worked with the victims who did show up, and they all were carrying these white roses. And when they talked, and they're given the chance to talk, and this is even before Marcy's Law, the roses were just shaking like this. And when you're a judge, especially a female judge, you absolutely cannot cry. And so I've learned, just if you want to know this, look up and the tears will not come. So, after the sentencing was over, I went back in my office and I stood in a corner and just buried my head. So that was probably one of the most difficult cases, because you couldn't make it right. All you could do was to just do justice. And, you couldn't undo the harm that had been done to these women, but you could do what was right for the community.
Backing off of that last question, in keeping with your professional experience, but also your deeply personal experience, can you describe one instance in which you faced an ethical dilemma and how you resolved it?
I can give you one as an attorney, which is kind of garden variety boring. But I think, that just had to do with a client who wasn't cooperating, but then there was a counterclaim filed, and I chose to stay on the case so that I wouldn't prejudice him by asking to get off the case, which would make the judge question, oh, what's wrong with this guy? Because I didn't want to cause, even though it was not a great relationship, he still deserved representation. I think, for me, interestingly, having been a foster parent, and I have to be careful that some situations that could be pretty close to home, because they stayed with me for 2.5 years, and then one of them died when he was 29 from probably a drug overdose, but they didn't find his body for weeks, and it was a pretty bad situation. I have to really examine those emotions to make sure that I'm aware of what the case is fully about, and to decide whether it's one, whether I should sit on or not. Because this may sound kind of funny to you, but when I became a new judge back in 2000, the Supreme Court actually performed Myers-Briggs personality tests on trial judges so that we understood, our strengths and our weaknesses and our decision-making style. So if we were too thinking, we might need to be more sensing. I came out of it pretty well, but it also made me understand that every judge, especially a trial judge, needs to have that kind of self-observation and self-awareness to make sure that of what their motives are in everything that they do, because they have so much power over someone's life. So I've never had to really get off of a case, but I've had to really make sure that I'm understanding, okay, where your feelings coming from here. Is it from your own experience, or is it from just the facts at hand? And to make sure that I keep those very separate.
Thank you for sharing that. In politics, we vote once a year on candidates, but when we volunteer in the community, we get to vote every single day on the kind of community that we want to live in. And you've kind of alluded to this in some of your earlier comments, but do you believe that volunteering in community service is a necessary component for persons holding public office? And what types of volunteering service have you been involved in?
Oh, I think it's really valuable because you see things from a different perspective. It's not from a profit-driven perspective, but from a greater good perspective with nonprofit. So most recently, I chaired the board of the Legacy Fund of the Columbus Foundation as their first allied chair. The Legacy Fund was formed about 2001, and it's a directed fund of the Columbus Foundation with an advisory board. And it was formed before there was the right to same-sex marriage, and we hope that right continues. So it was a way for especially people in the LGBTQ community to be able to give a devise or a legacy that could be used for this fund. And then as the fund, we advised the Columbus Foundation on ways that we could support LGBTQ organizations in Central Ohio, including a scholarship fund for young people. And then, for instance, in 2020, during the pandemic, when I chaired the board, we did flash grants for organizations to apply for in Central Ohio if they were experiencing, these are nonprofits, if they were experiencing hardship because of the pandemic. I've served on the Center for Community Solutions, which is very heavy on the health policy and advocacy issues. And I did that until I became a candidate for justice in 2019. So served on that board about 7 years. I served on the Legacy Fund for about 9 years. I have done just pro bono legal work at the Clintonville Resource Center in Northern Columbus, where I would go in once a week and just provide free legal services for basically working class and folks in poverty who, unbelievable how much they're just taken advantage of. Being rented an apartment by somebody who doesn't own the apartment, things like this. So there's a lot actually on my resume, which goes back in time. But one thing I really love is that a lot of young people are not able to graduate from high school without doing a service project. And so I love when I speak at Ohio State University, asking a class, okay, how many of you had to have a service project to be able to graduate? And I see about 75% of the hands go up. And so I think it's incumbent on people on the political side to understand that there is sort of a verve there for young people to want to give back, and the political parties have to step up and do more than just the old backroom style politics. And so I tend to be a little bit more independent of some of the typical political things, because I want young people to feel inspired that there's a way for them to become community leaders, elected community leaders. And I try to offer that hand. I would say kind of one hand forward, one hand back, because that's how that's how we have stability and sustainability.
Well, Justice Brunner, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your experiences and those stories. Well, thank you, Justice Kennedy. If you want to go ahead and take a few moments to provide some background and introduction, we'll go ahead and shift it over to you, Justice Kennedy. Thank you again.
Well, Jeremy, thank you. And Lauren, thank you for affording us this opportunity to have this forum with your members. On behalf of myself and my family, I would like to thank the family physicians for all the work that they do. Whether that's care in the office, care in a hospital, I really appreciate, as does my family, the work that doctors have done over the last, seriously, 5 years, including during the pandemic. It's been a struggle for everyone. So thank you for what you've done. I would like to say that I think that when you look at my candidacy for Chief Justice, you will see someone who's uniquely qualified. I have spent 37 years of service in the justice system. I began my career as a police officer in the city of Hamilton, and then later served the needs of families and the less fortunate as a lawyer. And that work really had a calling upon me to do more. I became a trial court judge in Butler County in the Domestic Relations Division, where I served for 14 years before coming to the Supreme Court of Ohio. In this December 7th, I will have been there 10 years. But it's my work off the bench that I think is unparalleled as well. And when we get to that last question about community service and what you do with your free time, I look forward to telling you all of that. I hope that you will find me worthy of your vote and your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Kennedy. And going from your experiences and time that you've had in the past, which is very diverse, what would you consider to be your judicial philosophy?
So many people today, when we start talking about judicial philosophy, I've heard people say that, well, that's just political fodder. There's no real division. But if you think about judicial philosophy exists on a continuum, and it's real. Every judge, every person has their belief of what judicial philosophy is in their own world. To the far left is activism, where it's outcome oriented, driven by what they believe is the best outcome in a case. To the far right is judicial restraint, where you are bound and moored by the text of a provision in distilling the meaning and applying it to facts. For myself, I am in the camp of judicial restraint. Unless you are tied to the language of a constitutional provision, a statute, or a contract, there is no way for individuals to gauge where the law is going. That's what makes it stable and predictable. And if you think about it, judicial restraint really falls into two categories. One is procedural. And what does that really mean? It means that you never render an advisory opinion. You never address a constitutional issue unless you're really required to address it. And that you only hear those matters. In the limited scope of what you're hearing, you only decide those things that are really necessary in order for you to resolve the legal controversy. And then if you looked at it from the lens of being substantive, we would say that substantive judicial restraint means we use the text to distill the meaning of the words. We go back to that originalist concept of distilling the meaning of those words at the time they were written. If you're deciding something in the 1803 original Constitution, you would never take out a dictionary from 2022, because we all know words have meaning and they meant something at the time they were written. Who would take out a dictionary to try to distill the meaning of Shakespeare without really looking at Old English and what those words truly mean? And the other part of that is stare decisis. You know, this Supreme Court has decided that tort reform for physicians is constitutional. So would you have others come behind the court and declare it unconstitutional because that was their view? That's a new view, different from those who sat on those original cases. So for me, judicial restraint is vital in order for Ohio to grow and to thrive economically, but also for you and your family to understand what your rights are under the law. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Kennedy. In your earlier response, you mentioned political fodder. Right now, our country is experiencing polarizing political factions and an increase in partisanship. Can you tell us how you think the court can be a model to promote civil discourse?
Well, I'm going to show my age, because obviously I grew up at a time when we used to discuss issues across party lines and we never attacked people. And we're really missing that in our society today. And it is a shame. For me, if you take a look at where the court system is and how cases come through the court system, whether I was a police officer testifying, whether I was a lawyer trying a case, or whether I was a trial court judge and hearing the case itself, or even at the appellate level now as a justice. In the world of the courtroom, we're really talking about the legal issues and the rights of parties, and we're never really attacking the other individual. We don't make decisions based on that. So if you look at the way that a court trial happens, we're really discussing an issue of law and how it applies to this family, or in this world, let's just say a contract. But you're really allowing each side to have an equal opportunity to present evidence, make arguments without personal or political attacks, and then the trial court in a neutral, detached manner making a decision. I liken to what we do in the court as what we would do in debate club. If you think back to high school, two people took an opposing view on a topic and the audience sat and listened to their opinion and the reasons why they were advancing their side of that debate. But they didn't attack one another in debate club. To me, it is a failure of our leaders that go and attack the individuals, whether that's a group, whether that's an individual or a party, instead of discussing the real issues that face every American today. So until leaders take off what I call the gloves and go back to the debate podium, we will continue to see civil discourse. And it bleeds over into how individuals treat one another as well. So when I was in the courtroom in domestic relations, you could imagine that at times tempers got high. But it was maintaining that cool, calm, collect and bringing that temperature down that allowed them to really focus on the legal issues in front of us. And that's what leaders have to do today.
Well, thank you so much for that answer and appreciate that. From your experiences on the bench, what would you consider to be your most difficult case and how did you handle it?
Well, I think if you look at my 37 years of service, it would be different for every step along the way. So as a police officer, I think the toughest thing I ever had to do was to hold the hand of a 10-year-old who had been raped and comforting her as they were going through the rape trauma kit at the hospital. I think as a lawyer, the most difficult thing was representing the less fortunate. And when you believe that they were truly innocent of what they were accused from, and really holding in your hands their freedom and liberty and fighting for them and hoping for a just result. As a trial court judge, I really found it difficult to hear custody cases. You're going to listen to two sides. You have to decide who's telling the truth. In the end, you have to make a decision of what's in the best interest of that child. Who's going to foster that loving, caring relationship for the other parent after a divorce or dissolution? And really weighed heavy on you, are you making the right decision? Carefully, very carefully weighing the evidence and making sure that you're seeing things from a neutral lens. And I think as a justice, the toughest case is always the death penalty case. You are looking at the evidence and did they get the conviction correctly? But then you also have to make that decision of, do the situations, the aggravating factors, are they outweighed by the mitigating factors? At the end of the day, you are required by the Ohio Constitution to decide if someone has a death sentence or not, to affirm it or not. And I think those cases all have significant gravity every step of the way.
Building off that last question and your professional and your personal experiences, can you talk about one time you faced an ethical dilemma and how you resolved it?
I can. There's a multitude of different things that you could talk about when you talk about ethics and the law. But the one that really comes to mind is we are charged with an obligation to report misconduct of our fellow judges, justices, and or lawyers. And as a result of that, unfortunately, you're placed in situations where you've seen something and now you have to do something. He was a lawyer who appeared in front of me who didn't regularly appear at the trial court in domestic relations. And he started doing domestic relations work. And he came for a first series of hearings, but then he failed to show up. When you called his office, you couldn't get a hold of him. You started hearing rumors about substance abuse. And then you heard the rumor of separation from his wife and his children. And in that moment, you have an obligation to protect his client and to ensure that they are being legally sufficiently represented. But you had a choice in that moment. And one of the gifts that we have at the Ohio Supreme Court is the Ohio Lawyers Assistance Program. So I could actually call the Ohio Lawyers Assistance Program to talk about what I was hearing, whether or not he was having mental health issues and or substance abuse issues. And by reporting there, he was able to engage in treatment and not lose his license. So that connection that I made, you had a choice. You had to comply with the duty of professional rules of conduct and make the report. But you had two avenues to report. You could report it as a grievance to the disciplinary council, or do what I think is the compassionate thing we are called to do, to help one another when they're struggling, and report to someone who has the ability to help them with our mental health issues and our substance abuse issues. And it was a great resolution. He was able to get clean and sober and practice law.
It's a great story to hear, Justice. Thank you for sharing that. You know, in politics, we vote once a year on candidates, but when we volunteer in the community, we get to vote every single day on the kind of community that we want to live in. Do you believe that volunteering and community service is a necessary commitment for persons holding public office? And what types of volunteering and community service have you been involved in?
I think it's vitally important for leaders to engage in community and engage in service. It's called public service for a reason. And for me, because of my calling and what I've done over the last 37 years, my free time is spent really in three categories, what I call beyond the bench, my service beyond what I just do for Ohioans in deciding cases. First and foremost is civic education. The professional rules of conduct really put an onus on us to go forth and talk to citizens about what the tripartite system of government is, what we do in the court system, and how we impact their lives. So I spend a lot of time speaking in high schools and junior highs, civic organizations, and really talking about not only those issues, but other issues that are important to individuals. I've been called upon to give a speech about the misperceptions of the First Amendment and the right of free speech, especially in this time and era, or whether it's talking to young people about how they can chase their American dream. I'm not the person most likely to be standing here as a justice. In fact, with many, you would look at my background and say, how is that possible? And it's possible because you decide, commit, work hard, and have fortitude. And nothing is unattainable as long as you work from that premise. So it's been a gift to be able to do that. My second thing is the issue of, veterans treatment courts. When Justice Stratton left the court, she left behind that work of veterans treatment courts. And how do we help veterans come wholly home? After 20 long years plus of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, multiple tours of duty, we have the 6th largest veterans population in the United States. And unfortunately, they come home with invisible injuries from war as well, whether that's post-traumatic stress, whether that's depression, whether or not they're now self-medicating to overcome what they're going through, whether it's flashbacks. And when we find veterans that are involved in the justice system, we're working to get them medical treatment that is specifically designed for those combat warriors. So I have spent a significant amount of time on the road. I've been to more than 62 counties. I've spoken to more than 100 judges, 84 of 88 sheriffs, all the chief probation officers, more than 400 probation parole officers in trainings around the state, helping them understand what is not only available, but helping them meet the individuals that afford that treatment through the VA system. So they have a partner that they can call and connect with to help our soldiers, our true American heroes, come wholly home. And the last thing that I have been doing in my service-oriented work is helping the formerly incarcerated. As a young patrol officer, I responded to a burglary of a young man who had broken into a tire store. When I arrived on the scene, he was just sitting there waiting. When I asked him what he was doing, he said, "I was waiting for you." He had just been released from prison. He had been there 20 years. He had nowhere to go. He had severed all his family relationships. And as a result of that, prison was the only thing he knew. He actually knew he could have a place to sleep, meals provided, and he understood how to live in the institution, and he just wanted to go back. It was so striking to me that someone would choose incarceration over freedom and liberty. So the third thing that I work on is living the life renewed and helping the formerly incarcerated actually have an opportunity to have that second chance of the God-given life they were given. And that is really working with somebody like Fred Ward in Cleveland, Ohio, who runs a hub for the formerly incarcerated, but he struggled to get those services connected to him with the men and women that he served. So spending time with those treatment services available up there, connecting them to Fred, and then helping him grow his program. For me, my next step would to launch a task force to look at how we can better serve the formerly incarcerated and actually help them live the life renewed. They have paid for their crimes. We need to help them enjoy the life that they should have.
Well, thank you, Justice Kennedy. This is very, I feel blessed to be able to learn more about you as a person and the things that you've been working on and working towards. And so we just really appreciate you giving us some of your time and sharing the talents and leadership that you've been providing. Did you want to say any final remarks before we end the recording here today?
Well, that would be great. Thank you, Jeremy. Again, Lauren, thank you. Thank you for reaching out to me and making this forum possible for me and for your members. I hope they too have learned something about me they might not have known. In closing, let me just say thank you to all your members for what you provide to families, caring for them in illness and preventative medicine. Thank you for what you did through the pandemic and helping everyone stay healthy. May God bless all of you, and I ask you for your vote and support for Chief Justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice.